Hey, what's up? It's Jim, and today I'm going to talk about the film The Lafayette Escadrille from 1958. And this is continuing my quest to review as much of William Wellman's filmography as I possibly can. And today I'm going to talk about his final film, or at least his final film release. Darby's Rangers was actually made after this, but then this was released later. So this is really the final film of his that he ever directed that was released. Now, Lafayette Escadrille, which is based on William Wellman's experience fighting in the Lafayette Flying Corps during World War I, but it's mainly based on one of his friends, who is played by Tab Hunter, plays the protagonist, Thad Walker. Wellman never says, even in his book, who the real guy this is all based on is, but it is apparently based on a true story. Thad Walker, who, after humiliating his father by stealing a car, because he comes from a wealthy family and his father is very imposing and slaps him incredibly hard, so much that he actually bleeds from stealing a car and dishonoring the family's name in the police blotter in the newspaper. So he goes to the French Foreign Legion and starts helping fight in what will eventually become World War II and being a flyer, where he actually meets William Wellman, actually played by his son, William Wellman Jr., and various other young men, including Tom Laughlin and young Clint Eastwood in smaller parts, and gets involved in the Lafayette Flying Corps, and then falls in love with a beautiful French woman who he wants to be with all the time, but he's training to fly, and he kind of doesn't like training to be a flyer. He really just wants to be with this beautiful girl, and one day has had enough and hits his drill instructor in the face, gets put into jail, and his friends break him out of jail, or the jail that's on the base where they're being trained, and they free him, and then he goes to his beautiful girlfriend, who is kind of insinuated slightly that she's a prostitute, but they don't really dwell on it because it's the 50s. She is now working as a conductress on the metro in Paris, and he goes there and has to stay in her apartment and hide away so he does not get arrested, so they can be together in love. Now, this is, as I said, William Wellman's final film, and much like Across the Wide Missouri, the reason it is his final film is because it was considered a very personal project to him. If you look at all of his films, a lot of the relationships is based on his relationship with the guys who he fought with in World War I, and that kind of strong male bonding that is throughout his films. In Public Enemy, Wild Boys of the Road, it goes throughout a lot of his films. I think he had always really wanted to make this film, and he had felt that he would be able to make this film the way he wanted to, since he had made so many big prestigious films throughout his career, like Stars Born, Public Enemy, and Wings. It didn't work out that way, unfortunately. He just retired and didn't direct a film again for the next 17 years of his life. And what really happened and why he was so upset was because the original ending of the film is that Tab Hunter's character is killed in the war, and then when his French girlfriend reads this, she jumps into a river in France, and then she basically kills herself. And that was too much of a bummer ending for the studio, and they didn't like it, so they reshot it. Although I don't know if they made him reshot it, but it sounds like they just reshot it and made it a happier ending. And it kind of messes with the film's entire structure, because there's a certain point where the film just is rising, and then it just is flat. Now, I think this film actually has more problems than just that ending, and Wellman hated this film. He considered it his worst film. I beg to differ, because I think Buffalo Bill and Across the Wide Missouri are a lot worse. One of the biggest problems with this film is just perspective. Tab Hunter's character of Thad, the film really should focus on him and his story, and that's really what it's about. And it doesn't. It's kind of about the Lafayette Flying Corps and their training also, which doesn't really work as well. It's kind of takes me out of it. It feels like he's making two different films almost. And it's all that jokey stuff is fun, and if he had made just a film about that, and this was more of a subplot, but it feels like it's wrestling with itself. What's it exactly want to be? I don't know if that is the Warner Hatchet job, or they did something to that, or included scenes that he would have cut, or anything. And I would love to see his original cut, which apparently the French actually really liked the original cut and felt they did a disservice to him. So, which is nice of the French, since he did fight for them. Reading the real story in his book, A Short Time for Insanity, I think sounds like an amazing movie. And I'd love to have seen that movie, but I didn't see that movie. If it had just been about that character and had been more honest to that story, I think it would make a great film. But cutting between all these other characters and their development, it just doesn't really matter in the grand scheme of the film. Like the character that's based on Wellman, played by his son, who I don't think is that great. I know him and Tom Laughlin would later together be in Billy Jack, so it's kind of interesting they're in this first. Had it just focused on him, and you cut out all that stuff with Lafayette Flying Corps, it would have been a lot stronger. I don't know if that was a hatchet job. It didn't seem to be as bad of a hatchet job as Across the Wide Missouri, but it seemed to be a lot more offensive. A hell of a lot more offensive. Because this was a very personal project to him, and it was originally called C'est la guerre, which is probably mispronounced because he said everyone said that in France during the war. It was also apparently in the UK called Hell Bent for Glory, and also With You in My Arms, which is a lot better of a title because Lafayette Escadrille also kind of acts like this film is more of an ensemble piece with a title like that. Oh, it's about the Lafayette Escadrille, but it's like not. It's about the Thad character and his French girlfriend, not giving it a more honest title. And apparently people who flew in the Lafayette Escadrille found it kind of offensive that it was called that, and were like, well, Wellman didn't fly in the actual Lafayette Escadrille, he fought in the Lafayette Flying Corps. But Wellman was like, no, I agree, I didn't want it to be called that, it wasn't his fault. And there was a lot of strife over it, and I think Wellman got more shit for this movie than he got from like Across the Wide Missouri and all that. And this was a financial disaster, an artistic disaster. It was actually the second time he had made a film about the Lafayette Flying Corps. He made The Legion of the Condemned, which is a lost silent film starring Gary Cooper, which if anyone does find, I'd love to see it. Just the idea of it sounds like a better film, and it has some unused aerial shots from wings, which makes it sound even more interesting. I don't understand why they wouldn't let him do it. Hollywood was moving in a very different direction. The studios were falling apart, especially in the 60s. And this was the late 50s. They put this on a shelf for 2 years. Having Tab Hunter's character fall in love with a prostitute who eventually, in the original story, he is very wealthy. He is wealthy in this film, but he's wealthy and he uses all his money because she's a prostitute to spend more and more time with her while he's waiting to be approved for the Flying Corps. And then they eventually fall in love and she decides to work for the Metro. It kind of just tries to make it like a nice studio epic. And I think Wellman, in a lot of places, especially early on, is trying to harken back to his 30s roughness, the pre-code grit that we were used to from him. There's certain shots, like where Thad is fighting with the guy when he's trying to escape and go to Paris, that looks very vintage Wellman, especially the beginning part where he steals a car and hurts that newspaper boy. Looks exactly like he did from the 30s, and it looked like he wanted to go back to that pre-code grit. That was his favorite period as a director, as he was constantly working in different genres. He loved being a studio director, but I think he also liked having an honesty and a realness. This feels more like a film that a yes man at the studio tried to direct a film like William Wellman and failed terribly. Wellman actually didn't want Tab Hunter, who Tab Hunter has a lot of respect for Wellman. I kind of feel bad that he gets kind of shit on for this movie, and I don't think he did a horrible job or anything. I actually think he was pretty good. He originally wanted Clint Eastwood to play the part, and a lot of people bring up that Wellman had made a lot of stars. He made Cagney a star, that he could have made Clint Eastwood a star earlier. And I think actually Clint Eastwood and Wellman would have worked really well together, but we're kind of just playing in an imaginary dream world. Apparently Paul Newman was also supposed to be in this. Wellman wanted Paul Newman and Clint Eastwood to be the two leads, and the studio said no, and he actually wanted a bigger budget, and the studio said no. I don't know if it's because he had just come off of 2 flops with Track of the Cat and Goodbye My Lady. Apparently people at the preview screenings loved the original cut, and you know, they all applauded, got a standing ovation, but Jack Horner and the studio didn't want that, despite the fact that I actually read that preview audiences weren't sure what to do with it, and I've read preview audiences loved it, so I'm a little confused about that one. I noticed that with Track of the Cat, had Track of the Cat happened in the late 60s or the 70s, Track of the Cat would have done a lot better. And I think Lafayette Escadrille, or whatever it would have been called, I think would have been far more acceptable had it been made in the 70s or the late 60s. Wellman at this time, he was always kind of either ahead of his time or just really good at getting a lot of stuff passed during his time. And I think he had gotten sick of it. And you can kind of tell, like, he didn't want to kind of do the same style. He didn't really want to do the documentary style anymore when he got to Battleground. He wanted to keep evolving. He was an auteur. He loved being a studio director, but when he was a studio director, they gave him more freedom than they were giving him at this point. This was really a bigger shame because everyone who was living from the Lafayette Escadrille or the Lafayette Flying Corps hated this movie and kind of blamed him, and apparently there were lawsuits, which I don't know who sued who. It's just a sad way for a great director to go out, and I think he really wasn't respected in his later years. Certainly was a little too daring sometimes with West Were the Women and Drag the Cat. I've been doing all these Wellman films, and I've been kind of putting out one a week or every couple of weeks, and it's sad to end on this. It's sad that he went out like this, because I think he deserved a better ending. It's a shame because he really blamed Jack Warner for this, and there are a lot of other studio heads he could have blamed through his whole career. Oxbow incident getting shelved for 2 years and having to make 2 films for them so Oxbow could be made, and he had to make Darby's Rangers to make this. I think he just got sick of all the studio crap and he just retired. He told his wife he was retiring, and that was it. This one makes me sadder because it's like the film that kind of took him out. This film does have more problems than just the studio and Clint Eastwood not being in it. And I'm wondering, was the ending the only thing they changed? And if you look at a film like Purchase Price, or you look at films where you see a real character change, this film almost fights it with cutting to the Lafayette Flying Corps and showing them training. This was shot by William Cothier, helped him shoot Wings, and they almost try to mimic the Wings cinematography, but they have rear projection behind them instead of actually having the camera on the plane while they're flying up in the air. I've seen a lot of rear projection in planes and in cars that just really, really awful. And they kind of get it to work, but it doesn't have that intensity to it. I will give it to him that this film could have been a lot better. And it starts off with a bang with that epic shot where that long tracking shot that, like, it feels like he really wanted to get back to some of that, but be the auteur he really should have been given the chance to be. Lafayette Escadrille, I wouldn't recommend it to anyone who's not into Wellman. And if you are, it's a sad film to see. It's a sad film to kind of end this year-long series on. That's what his filmography was, so I guess I can't end it any nicer, and I have to end it the way he ended his career. So if you have seen Lafayette Escadrille and you would like to talk about it, then comment below in the comments and subscribe if you would like to. So that was the last of my William Wellman regular series. I'm going to be back in April with 2 reviews of Wellman films, and then there'll be 1 a month, and every time I can find one after that. This will really just keep going, but as a regular weekly or bi-weekly, or having 2 a week, that's ending after this film. I will eventually get to Darby's Rangers and the John Waynes and any films I have missed, but please check out my William Wellman playlist. I've worked very hard on all these reviews, and I would appreciate it if you like William Wellman, check them out. It's been a lot of fun, and I really love doing it. And thank you for watching, and I hope to see you next time I post a video, and in April when I post another William Wellman review. And thank you very much.